What is up, people? Welcome back to the Pragmatic Guide to Building Muscle. This is video number 8 in the series, and today we're going to be going through how to audit your training program so you know that it's working. Before we get into the video, if you do me a big favor, and please like the video, comment if you have any questions as I'm going through it, and don't forget to subscribe. I'm on a journey to 1,000 subscribers and I am almost there. So I just need your help to get there. It's very much appreciated. And to show my appreciation, I've actually created a free Pragmatic Guide to Building Muscle guide, which you can find in the description, free to download. And yeah, that's my present to you for clicking that subscribe button. Okay, let's get into the video. If you're new to the channel, my name is Shane Story. I'm an online strength and physique coach. I'm also a natural bodybuilder myself, as well as an ex-powerlifter. So I know a thing or two when it does come to how to get the most out of your training for building size. And if you are new to the channel, this video is probably not the best place to start. So I've created a playlist of all of the videos from this series, so you can go back and watch all 7 of them, where you go through all the training variables in depth, add lots of nuance, and when they matter, how to apply them. But today we're just going to go through how to audit the training program and how to tweak the variables to ensure that we keep on progressing. Because while you may get your initial program and you can progress up to a certain point, inevitably you're going to get to the point where things just don't seem to work as well as they once did. And this could be because you're becoming more advanced, or there are other things in the background from a recovery standpoint that are just not really kind of allowing you to make the same progress as you did before that change in circumstance. Just like when we're considering any of our training variables and deciding on our program, when it comes to auditing the program, we still want to have the same decision filter. Is it specific for our muscle building goals? Is this change something that I can progress over time? Is it repeatable, and do I enjoy the changes that I am making? And is it actually effective? Because without this filter, it's very difficult for us to know if the changes that we make are going to really align with our own personal goals, align with our own personal circumstance. Now, auditing the training program is where the true personalization of a program really comes in. In video 7, we talked about how we can use our own constraints and our own personal circumstance to formulate a program. But over time, as we continue to respond to a program and as we continue to progress, there is going to have to be a point where we do have to make some changes that we need to know when is a big change needed and when is just a small tweak, the thing that's going to keep us moving forward. So it's important that when we are going through this process, that we have a system that allows us to diagnose the issue and allows us to make that adjustment. So the biggest question to answer first and foremost is the program working? And how do we know if the program's working? To know if a program is working for us, we need to know what to look for. Ultimately, building muscle is a long-term goal, and it's going to take you a while before you really start to notice meaningful gains, especially as you get more advanced. So with that, we need to have different markers to look at that are going to be proxies of muscle development taking place over time. The challenge a lot of people face is that it is that long-term process. And when they're not getting the gains in line with their expectations, they can start to fiddle with different training variables and different aspects of their training program when it maybe wasn't really warranted. You need to think of building muscle and your program like a recipe for a cake. When you're baking a cake, you don't put the cake into the oven, take it out halfway and say, okay, I need to add in some flour now, or I need to add in more sugar, or I need to add in more salt. No, what do? You do the recipe as is on the sheet, you put it in the oven, you let the bake take place, you take it out of the oven, you taste test, and then you decide, okay, it needs a bit more sweetness, or it needs a bit more salt, or I didn't use enough flour. You don't take it out midway and chop and change the variables, because there's no way to know if that initial bake was the right one because you started to chop and change things. And maybe you started to chop and change things all at once. You added in 3 different variables all at the one time. And this is the issue that a lot of people face. And this is the exact same with our training program. We want to make small tweaks when they're needed based off logic and reason, and give those tweaks time to take place. Then after a given period, say 8, 12, 16 weeks, we reassess our training variables, we reassess our progression. And then we say, okay, did that tweak we made actually lead to a meaningful change? If not, okay, maybe it was a different lever that we need to pull. Let's pull that lever now, and then we can start the reassessment process again. So what should we look for within our training to know that it is working? Well, I think what I've ticked off here are probably the biggest ones. We want to see performance improvement in the gym, and that's going to be based off your experience level. We talked about this in one of the earlier videos where I talked about how a beginner can expect to progress pretty much every single session and maybe hit a PB every session. Somebody who's in the intermediate bracket, they may be looking at having a PB happen every other week to every block. An advanced person, they might be looking at multiple blocks before they hit a new PB. And this is just the sad reality of becoming more advanced. There is like diminishing returns that you get from your training. And the same goes for that person gaining muscle too. The more advanced person who's closer to their genetic ceiling is just not going to have as much meaningful or detectable muscle change happen over time. So their assessment strategy is going to look different to somebody who's earlier on in the process. But performance improving is a good proxy to look at. So we want to ensure when we're going through our training assessment that if we're beginner or new to the gym, we should be expecting that progression to happen every week, every session. If we're intermediate, every other week or every block. An advanced person, maybe every couple of blocks, they're hitting some new training load. Pictures and measurements, these can be useful. Measurements, not so much as you get more advanced, because some of the things that happen with advanced lifters is they might have the same circumference thickness to the likes of their arm, but what is happening is the composition could be changing. So it might not necessarily be as useful for somebody at that stage. However, somebody who's maybe newer to training, they may notice that they see more rapid changes in arm growth. So tracking changes there, maybe alongside tracking some waist measurements, can actually be a really good tool for them to use. But circumference measurements can be a really good tool to help you track changes in key body parts or key areas that you want to grow. So an example here is you have dedicated a lot of your volume towards arm training and you're really trying to bring them up. You want to ensure that the volume there is driving the response that you want to see. Now, depending on your level of advancement, you're going to have different timescales. Somebody who's a beginner, they may be able to take these measurements every 8 weeks and they might be able to see some new change. Somebody who's advanced, they may be looking at 16 to 20 weeks before they really start to notice any meaningful difference, if any at all. If we're considering that most of us here, if we're being honest, care about how we look and want to see the visual change when it does come to the muscle growth, is pictures, okay? Taking clear pictures in the same lighting, at the same time, every week can be a really good tool to assess your change over time. Similar idea applies here relative to the person who's beginner. You're going to see very quick change. The person who is a more advanced lifter, they're going to see maybe new change every time they end a gaining phase or every time they end a diet phase, but they might not necessarily see much change happen in the interim. Whereas the person who's newer, they might see change every single time they take progress pictures, or at least like every month if they're doing things correctly. So I'd recommend when you're taking your progress pictures that you take them, as I said, in the same conditions at a set time every single week, maybe first thing in the morning. That's generally what I do. I take them fasted in the morning with the same lighting. And what I also do, because I'm a bodybuilder, is I take them in all my mandatory bodybuilding poses. And this is something I recommend my clients do, not to every single mandatory, but even for the person who's a physique enthusiast. They have no drive to get on stage at all. Doing some bodybuilding poses just helps you to show off the muscularity versus just standing front, back, and sides. So if you are looking to maybe show your development, I recommend maybe throwing in a most muscular to show off the front development, a side chest or a side tricep to show off the side, and then maybe a rear double bicep or rear lat spread to show off how your development is going for the back from top to bottom. Now the final point on is your program working, is your recovery complete? What I mean by this is as you go through the training week, are you ready and fresh to hit your next training session? Or every time you revisit legs, are you ready to hit them with the same level of enthusiasm as you did the week before? Now, it's normal to have a little bit of fatigue crop up as you go through a training block for sure, but you should ideally not be having too much performance decrements week to week. That could indicate a recovery issue, and that can be solved with things outside the gym, but it can also be solved by just manipulating your training variables to suit what your recovery can actually handle. Now, there are some common markers that newer trainees look at and think that these are signs that the training program is working. And while they're not signs that the program is working, they can still be part of an effective training program. But they're going to be likes of soreness, the pump, and being tired. Soreness is just a byproduct most of the time by doing something slightly novel. That could even be you come into the gym and train a bit harder than last week, or you hit a new training PB, or you go into a slightly deeper range of motion that you did the previous week. Maybe you changed an exercise. Maybe you did a little bit more volume. These are small artifacts that could pop up just throughout the training process. For example, if I go and train with a friend and I'm following his training session, we could be doing the same exercises in a slightly different order for a slightly different rep range. I'll come out of that session being pretty sore, but it may not necessarily have been effective for me. And it's a common pitfall of a lot of new trainees to assume that they should always be sore every time they're coming in to train. And this can sometimes cause them to chop and change their program without it really being warranted. In the initial few weeks of the training program, you probably will feel a little bit sore because you're doing something new that you haven't done before. After a while, this starts to dissipate as you become more trained and your body starts to get used to the stressor. And this is called a repeated bout effect. It's a protective mechanism that our body has to protect us against muscle damage, so that when we go through the same training session again or with the same training variables, that we don't get as sore as we did the previous time. Because if you're to get as sore as you do the first time you do a leg day, for example, and you had to go through that every single time you do leg day, is that going to be repeatable? Is that going to be enjoyable? Probably not. It's probably going to be something that's going to take a toll on your day-to-day life, especially if you're having that across every other single training session. So that's something to consider. Soreness is not an indicator of your program working for you. The pump is also not a sign that your program is working for you. The pump is simply a byproduct of your training versus it being the thing that's driving muscle growth. We talked ad nauseum in previous videos of how mechanical tension is the main driver of muscle growth. And if you're doing something like a set of 5, which is going to have really high stimulation of the high threshold motor units and big type 2 muscle fibers, you are unlikely to really get a pump from that. But if you shift the reps up to 8 to 12 now, and you're still training with the exact same intensity, you're probably going to get more of a pumping effect there. And that's simply just a byproduct of more blood being pumped into that tissue over and over and over again. But I can walk up the stairs 10 times and I can finish doing that and have a pump on my legs. Does that mean that my quads grew? No. There's unlikely to be sufficient tension developed with my quads to have an effect take place. Now, if I did it 1,000 times, maybe, but I wouldn't be doing that to grow my quads. So while the pump is nice and you look amazing while you have one, it's not directly leading to muscle growth. But it can be a good proxy for exercise selection because we're consistently getting a pump to the body part that we want when we perform a specific exercise. That could indicate at least that exercise is driving the blood flow where we want it. And as much as I'm an advocate of training hard as fuck, being tired is not a sign that the program is working, okay? A sign that the program is working is that you're able to come into the gym, repeat performances, and improve on those performances. Because if you're tired all the time and you're constantly in a state of fatigue and you're never recovered for your next training session, you're not going to be able to pass the decision filter. You're not going to be able to progress your training. It's not going to be repeatable, and therefore it's not going to be effective. So if we're just tired all the time and that's impacting your performance, then it doesn't matter how hard you're training, because the training that you're doing or the work you're doing is misplaced. It is not going towards the actual goal. Your goal now is just being tired. If the goal is gaining muscle, we want to be fatigued enough, but we also want to factor in recovery. So now that we went through some useful proxies to understand if our training program is actually serving us and serving the goal, we need to now go through the diagnosis and how we can make the adjustments when they aren't needed. So we're going to talk about exercise issues first and foremost. Say you're going through a training program, you're doing your dumbbell bench press, and for some reason you just can't increase up to the next rep. You've been stuck on 6 reps for like the last few weeks. You can't go up and load either. What do we do here? Do we add in more volume? Do we add in more chest work? Do we reduce it? What's the easiest fix here? So this is an exercise issue, because if we're seeing that performance is stable elsewhere, our machine chest press is going up, our pec deck is going up, maybe we're doing a bench press, that's also going up, but now we just see that one lift is stalling. Well, that's just an exercise issue. That's not a system issue. That's just something small within a training program that could just slightly be adjusted. So an exercise issue is where we have one lift stall, stable performance elsewhere, and we could also add that your muscle is actually recovering fine. So you're not noticing any major soreness or any major knock-on from performing the exercise. So what we can ask ourselves here is, okay, this exercise, what's our technique looking like? Is our technique maybe the limiting factor? Has our technique changed as we've added more load? Maybe it's a case to go up to this 50 kilos for 6 reps. You jump from the 45s straight up to the 50s because there's no 47 and a halves. And as a result, your technique changed completely, right? Initially, you're kind of starting more with this like 45-degree arm pat with the 45s. Now 50s, your arms are kind of flaring out like this when you're performing the press. Technique could be the limiting factor here. So we have a couple of things here. There could be you progressed the load too fast, took a weight that you weren't really able for right now. Because of the big jump in load, you were probably better off doing a longer rep range versus 6 to 8. Maybe you do 6 to 10. Once you get to 10s, maybe you're able to handle 50s for 6 reps. And while you're doing the 45s until you get to 10 reps, you're maintaining that technique. So to jump up to 50, you're still do those 6 reps at 50 with good technique. So there's a skill aspect, and then there's also potentially an issue with loading. So maybe we could even look at an exercise tweak to move it over to a form of exercise that we can go with a slower rate of progression. Maybe on a bench press or an incline press to sub it out, or machine chest press, we're able to micro load it with like 1.25 kilo plates. That could be the better move. So I'm going to put here skill and force progression. Now keep in mind that this is only one part of the training program, right? A single lift that's stalled, everything else is stable. The muscle itself that you're looking to train with the exercise is recovering fine, progressing everywhere else. So something like this just really needs a small tweak. This is where we look at our local fixes. But before we go into local fixes, let's talk about the muscle issue. The muscle issue, it's going to require generally a bigger change to kind of get the movement that we want within our training program. This is something that we might be able to see happen over 1 to 2 training blocks. This might be something we notice over a couple of weeks. So when we're looking at muscle issue, we want to have that assessment process, which we talked about earlier, looking at how our performance is doing across the training block or in line with our rate of progression. We should be seeing the changes within our physique pictures or within our measurements. We should also be looking at how the recovery is doing. So those are the main things we're looking at when we're trying to diagnose this muscle issue. So muscle issue for me would be there's multiple lifts stalled. There might also be constant soreness. There could be injuries. Maybe you're developing some type of tendinopathy. We see regressions in the gym and many exercises. And we might also see that general fatigue is high. So with the exercise issue, I discussed how that issue can be solved with a rotation exercise selection. It could be influenced with a rotation in rep range or broadening out that rep range. It could be an improvement of skill as needed. But with this is going to mean that we're going to have changes to our bigger training variables. We might be looking at volume here, could be too high. Intensity could be too high. Our frequency might be too low. Or we're not getting ample time to create quality work within a session. So we're doing way too much within a session for that particular muscle group. So now that we have the issues covered, the fixes are going to seem a little bit clearer because it kind of already alluded to some of the fixes that we can actually make. So with our local fixes, these are just the small changes that we can make to variables that are not going to have a big change on the rest of the overall program. So we could look at here, rotate exercise. We could adjust, extend rep range, which is going to influence our progression strategy. Maybe we need to lower the weight and focus on getting good control. If we go back to our quality control video, I talked all about that. So that could be improving the tempo with your training, trying to really develop a good mind-muscle connection to the exercise and trying to make each rep look the exact same, just so your final reps getting a little bit slower as you get closer to failure. Or we could extend rest. That exercise is plateauing because we're not resting enough between sets. Maybe we're at the end of our session and you're rushing through your arm work and you're only giving yourself a minute to rest, when maybe if you rested 2 minutes, 3 minutes, you're now starting to see further progressions. So there we have our local fixes. So if we have one lift that's stalled, muscle recovery is fine, what's the fix? We could rotate out that exercise, we can adjust or extend the rep range, we could improve execution on that by improving things like tempo and control, and we could look at maybe extending the rest to see if that also influences the performance on that specific exercise. So our system fixes are going to be a bit more heavy-handed because the variables are changing, are going to have a greater influence on our recovery and ability to progress that bit more than the likes of these local fixes. And these may be changes that we might need to make only every couple of blocks. It's okay to be heavy-handed here, I'd say, in regards to making big jumps down or big jumps up, because what you'll get from actually making big changes up and down in the early stages is you'll find like an upper threshold of what you can handle, but also that bit that's a little bit too much to recover from. But you'll also find where your minimum progression level is with intensity or volume or frequency. But you also find the level which is like way below the baseline where you could actually adapt from. So don't be afraid over your training journey or over your training career. I'm not talking about just like over this year, over the next couple of blocks, to experiment with that, but this could be something that you got try on like different life stages. For example, if you have to go from 5 days a week training to 3 days a week training because maybe you have a family now or you're going through a really tough time in university, this could be an opportunity for you to tweak those training variables and see where do you fall. But we're going to stick with this specific situation right now, okay? So if you're noticing, for example, that with our chest, we're having all of our pressing movements, they're starting to stall, we're constantly sore, we're maybe picking up a little bit of tendinopathy within our pec. We're also noticing that we're seeing things slightly regress from a performance standpoint. What do we do here? So we look at our volume, we look at our intensity, and we look at frequency. If you go back to the volume, intensity, frequency video that I did, you'll remember that these variables, they all influence each other. So we can't change one without having some type of effect happening to the other one. Sometimes when people bring their volume up, their intensity of training goes down. Sometimes when volume goes down, the training intensity goes up. Sometimes when we bring up volume, frequency to spread that volume over a greater time period, that also increases. And consequently, when volume goes down, sometimes the likes of frequency may also go down. Sometimes when training intensity goes up, frequency will reduce. If intensity is down, frequency might go up. So they all affect one another. But frequency is really just a way to distribute our volume intensity across the week. Now, one thing that I actually didn't mention in this muscle issue, which I probably should mention before I get into the system fixes, is that maybe you're at a point where you never, ever, ever get sore. Maybe you're at a point where you never really feel as if the muscle is like very fatigued and you feel like you could handle more workload. So we're looking at like this, is it working perspective from like, am I doing too much or am I doing too little? And we need to know how to make adjustments based off the back of that. So if you're in this place, right, where you're seeing everything solved, there's constant soreness, there's injuries popping up, that's a clear sign that we're just doing too much. The biggest lever, in my opinion, to pull from these three variables is going to be volume. Ideally with intensity, we still want to be training everything within a close proximity to failure. So in my eyes, that's going to stay relatively fixed. So the first thing I look at is a volume pull. And how we do this is we pull just from the muscle that is plateauing. We are not going to pull from other muscle groups. If your chest is the thing that's lagging, is the thing that's stalling, we're not going to pull from your arms, we're not going to pull from your legs. We're just going to pull from that muscle. So keep that in mind. We're not changing the entire program, we're changing that one area. So what that will look like, if we're noticing that again, all these issues are popping up, we might look at decreasing volume by 20%. Then as we go through our training process again, after tweaking that variable, we'll assess, okay, is my performance improving? Are my pictures looking better? Are my measurements improving? Is recovery getting better session to session? But if you're in a position where you notice at the end of a training block, say 8 weeks, you're not noticing any change in your pictures, your performance doesn't really seem like it's moving all that fast, you're noticing that you're completely fresh, right? Like literally even the day after you do your chest session, that you could potentially train your chest again. That could be a sign that we're just not doing enough. And that person needs to increase their volume up by 20%. So these are two areas to look at. If we're running into all these issues, volume is probably going to be the biggest driver to pull down, and we could look at maybe pulling it up if we're noticing that we're not really getting the results that we want from a performance perspective, a picture perspective, and maybe we're over recovering. Now, while I did mention we probably want to keep intensity relatively fixed and train within a close proximity to failure, we can also look at intensity through that percentage of 1RM realm. And if we're noticing that we're getting injuries and maybe we're getting constant soreness, maybe it could be a case that our intensity is too high. And if you go back to the discussion on volume, intensity, and frequency in that video, I did discuss how rep ranges can also be a proxy for our intensity bands that we're working within. So maybe it's a case that we need to go up in the repetition spectrum. Maybe you've been training a lot of like 4 to 8 rep range. Maybe you'd be better off going to 8 to 12, because you notice that when you go really, really heavy, those muscle issues, they start to be a little bit more pronounced. But when you bring the rep range up, you don't seem to get them as much. So that's essentially how we would adjust the intensity in this context. So now as we look at frequency, we might look at the person first and foremost who is dealing with these issues, constant soreness, fatigue, their multiple lifts are stalled for that particular muscle group, and they're pulling down their volume. They may have been in a position where, because their volume was so high, they're also training at a higher frequency for that muscle, and it just wasn't recovering effectively. So what we could do here is we could also just look at decreasing that person's training frequency. Now, we don't need to change these variables both at the same time, but we could go one or the other. Or if a big scale change is needed for that particular person, then they can maybe look at reducing two. But I really only look at changing one at a time, if I'm being completely honest. So I'm just going to put here, decrease it if not recovering. And for the person who is on the opposite side of the spectrum, where they feel like they're almost over recovering and they feel like having 4 days between hitting their chest, they are just like going too long without getting any sufficient stimulus, they may need to have an increase in frequency. So increase if over recover. covered. And that is how we'd adjust our training program based off if it's working. We diagnose what the issue is it an exercise issue, is it a muscle issue? We then decide how we're going to adjust. We look at our local fixes with the further up training variables in the pyramid, you could say. Exercise execution, we have control and quality of our reps, we have tempo, we have exercise selection and even ordering of the exercise within a session. Then we look at the system fixes, which are going to be looking at our biggest training variables, our volume, our intensity, and frequency. Do we need to pull volume down or bring it up? Do we need to adjust our repetition ranges to help us manage intensity of the program? Do we need to adjust our frequency, bring it up or down, based off how we're recovering on a session-to-session basis? And that, my friends, concludes this video for how to audit the training program. If you did enjoy the video, please make sure to like, share, subscribe. I'm on the journey to 1,000. I'm almost there, so I could get there with your support. So thank you very much for watching. We hope to catch you in the next one.